The aftermath of the Iran crash, the ICC's empty gesture toward Gaza, the big lobster that couldn't, and more. The Monica Perez Show starts now. Well, I haven't talked to you since the Iranian president, Raisi, a hardliner with supposedly in Iran, was killed in a helicopter crash. So here's the story. Every time I hear something that, if I hear a foreign leader gets assassinated, or killed, I immediately think of assassination. And if there's an attempted assassination and they don't die, I think it's a false flag. So we had the Slovakian president was shot a couple of times, supposedly last week, and I couldn't decide whether he was being assassinated by the CIA because he was a right winger, or if, as a former left winger, he was just pretending to be a right winger and pretending to be shot to pass a media censorship law. I don't know. I still don't know the answer to that one. But this time it looks like the president of Iran and numerous other people were killed in a helicopter crash. But so, of course, I am suspicious that it was intentional, that he was killed, or maybe one of the other people was the real target and he was just a victim of what they call haystacking, where you kill a bunch of people in a plane or whatever, and it looks like it's an accident, or it looks like it's not targeted at that one person. So it could have been that. I don't know. But there are a few things that make me, just curious about this story. So a couple of weird things. Uh, I There were conflicting reports about the accident in the beginning, and also the photographs look weird and contradict some of the reporting. So I don't think it didn't happen. I just feel like, as usual, we're not being told the whole story, and I'm going to tell you some of those details. And then I'd also want to talk about, like, maybe why someone would want to take this guy out. He's described to us as a hardliner. Maybe he is. One thing about Iran, I noticed two things that happened over the past few years that made me think that at least some of the elements of Iran's government is controlled opposition of ours. And specifically, I've mentioned this before, the death of Soleimani, who was the head of the Quds force, I think it was, a couple of years ago, which we killed him. I think that was like admitted or close to admitted. That millions of people supposedly came out for his, it certainly was a huge number of people came out for his funeral and seemed to be genuinely mourning him and expecting retribution. But they did not get it because, by some wacky coincidence, just when the Iranian government was getting super pissed at us for doing that, they accidentally blew up a plane full of Canadians and Ukrainians on the runway in Tehran, and then were so horrified by that they just called it even. That was totally weird, mainly because the plane was full of Ukrainians and Canadians, which, if you're going to put somebody up to helping, it would be those countries for sure. Also, the story was revealed to us by Bellingcat, which is like a big MI6 cover guy, like in Media Deep Throat, but he's really an MI6, which is the equivalent of the CIA, but out of England. So I'm not going to trust anything coming out of that guy. But at the same time, I was investigating that. I also looked into Rouhani, who was the president. I believe he was the president at that time of Iran. And his story was super weird in that he got a PhD in Glasgow, Chalcedonian University under a PhD advisor by the name of, let's see, I wrote it down somewhere. Hassan Amin. Hassan Amin got his PhD in Glasgow under the tutelage of a guy named John Grant, who was revealed later to be an MI6 guy. And he was the legal scholar who explained to the world what was happening at the trial of the Lockerbie bombers, who were specifically the Libyan guy, who I'm pretty sure it's well established was falsely accused and convicted of the Lockerbie Pan Am jet, which was brought down in a and I think it's, again, like, pretty well established it was a CIA operation, which is unbelievable that our country does this stuff and, it doesn't bring down the government, but this is where where, we stand on this idea that we're superior. And I shouldn't even say we, because this is a government that completely violates its founding documents, and there's really nothing I think we can do about it. Like, I just don't the voting doesn't work. You could be a martyr, but you wouldn't really accomplish anything. Anyway, so this guy isn't Rouhani, but he also isn't Soleimani, and he is being painted as his name is Raisi, Raisi. He's being painted as a hardliner and a huge jerk by our government, particularly because this is a line from one of the articles. He presided over mass imprisonments of journalists, political activists, and dual citizens, including Americans. It says Iran also stepped up detentions of foreign nationals, including several Europeans who were held for years without a fair and free trial, according to Western governments. It says previous governments had mostly imprisoned dual citizens with Iranian passports. Well, they're dual citizens of what and what? Anyway, but you see what they're saying, that he cracked down on foreigners, but it seems to me that it's quite possible he was really just trying to put down that fifth column, like foreigners or elements that are trying to undermine the government. And if you think that that's not exactly what we do, and that it's totally reasonable to think that he was just trying to do that, I mean, or that's a possibility anyway. The op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today said this. So widely, if you read the RT stuff, Russia Today stuff, and you read the like Wall Street Journal stuff, you'll see that they basically say the same thing. It's not going to change the course of Iranian policy. It's not going to do much. It's going to be emotional. They're going to have to get through it. So it's going to be disruptive, but policy is unlikely to change. Now, why did they do it? I'll tell you what I think in a second about that. But so policy is not going to change, but Iran will be in a weakened state. So the Wall Street Journal's op-ed today says the U.S. could help spread a persistent message of support for brave protesters like it did in the Soviet Union during the Cold War, help dissidents communicate inside Iran, and let them know that their cause has global support. It means trying to undermine the regime from within. So they are openly recommending, the Wall Street Journal, which is obviously a political entity, is openly recommending undermining the Iranian regime. So knowing that that's what we do, we look to opportunities to do that. This guy that's why journalists are that. That's what they are over in those places. They just hide. It's so obvious that that's what they really are a lot of times. So I don't, I wouldn't just assume that this is telling the truth, that this guy was wrong in trying to suppress those people, if he really even did it. The Wall Street Journal goes on to say, to try to justify how they're saying these people aren't getting a free and fair trial, right? But we're recommending a crime against the law of nations, the sovereignty of this nation, right? So the Wall Street Journal has to try to justify that, because even though we are, America has American exceptionalism, which means we do not have to respect the sovereignty of other nations, but they have to respect ours. It's an exception to the law of nations, as far as I can tell. They always try to justify it. So in that same op-ed, it says both the Obama and Biden administrations have instead tried to court the regime in the forlorn hope that its leaders want to behave like a normal country, but they don't. They want to spread revolution as they pursue a nuclear weapon that would make them far more powerful and difficult to deter. That's the reality to keep in mind as Iran replaces one revolutionary leader with another. This is baseless. It's baseless. Like, they've been telling us about this nuclear stuff. You can go back and see these funny clips where in every American presidential election, they're like, within 1 year, Iran's going to have nukes. Well, either they have them or they don't have them, but they're not using them. And, those reports have always been unsubstantiated. And to attribute your own mean, they're asserting motives without evidence, and it's to justify our preemptive attack on them and their government. So why might they want to take this guy out specifically? Well, he may have been in line to be, I think, did I read this right? The third Ayatollah? It's had only been a couple of Ayatollahs. How's that even possible? But maybe. Anyway, now the existing Ayatollah, maybe his son will take his place. That's like he might have moved up the ranks. This guy was supposedly in line, being considered as a successor. He was looking east to China and Russia, supposedly. I'll read you a little more. We have a couple minutes for this story. I'll read you a little more about what he was up to. He also was, here's the other thing. The reason he was there at the border of Azerbaijan is that he traveled a lot, saying that he would visit each of the 30 provinces or whatever you call it every year. So he'd really be connecting with the people, and that could be quite powerful. It really could be quite powerful. And perhaps he was genuinely for the people, like some people say Soleimani was. So if that's the case, then he'd be very dangerous to the West if they have some controlled opposition over there. Now, here's another interesting thing is that he went down in a Bell helicopter. I forget which kind of helicopter it was, but he went down, and so many people do go down in helicopters. It was so weird that just the other day we were listening to Steve Ray Vaughan, and my husband went to his funeral. I remember the day he died. He went down in a helicopter in fog, and it did look like it was foggy when we saw the pictures of this guy's helicopter crash site. And my husband looked and he's like, wow, all the Bell helicopters. And I think it was the specific model, the 206B that Stevie Ray Vaughan went down in, that we were marveling at how many people died there. And that this one was it was a Bell, but it was a different one. I think it was more of like a military kind of one. But the fact that helicopters go down make them the perfect vehicle for an assassination to look like an accident. So, saying, well, helicopters go down. They do. Like, helicopters are super scary. I would not get in one. I don't recommend it. Anyway. Let's see what else I wanted to tell you about this too. Oh, a couple of funny things. So the Wall Street Journal is trying to paint this guy poorly, and one of the things they use against him is it says Raisi's 2021 victory was largely the result of a historically low turnout of 48.8%, of which I think he got 60% of the vote. So it's still an absolute majority, actually. But then, this just drives me crazy about what passes for journalism in this country is they just say a bunch of stuff that's not in evidence, and just make up explanations, which I consider to be, I would use the word facile, make it seem easy. It says, oh, he got this historically low turnout. It was a sign of divisions within Iranian society and a reflection of widespread apathy among Iranians and discontent with the lack of real choice in the vote. Now, when Bashar Assad, when Assad was elected with 95% of the vote, they're like, well, they were forced to vote. There was no competition. So whether you have too little or too much, it's the same thing. But it was funny because I just we used to have low turnout. This high turnout that we're told we have today, I think is complete bull. So anything above 50%, I think those are the extra votes they're throwing in there. I've seen it where it looked to me like there were more votes than voters, like there were more votes than registered voters. That's certainly true in some counties. But I remember a couple of times being like, I don't think so. 1996, the voter turnout in the U.S. was 49%. This was 48.8% was the Raisi. Now, what was that a sign of? Was that a sign of apathy when Clinton was elected? Was it a sign of apathy or discontent with the lack of real choice? How do you know what it is? Just shut up. Okay, so they're going to do a new election on June 28th. which is about a year ahead of schedule because their constitution requires an immediate election. uh, so there were two things that Russia Today, which is like it's the Russian news, but it's an alternative story. At least you can maybe iterate towards the truth that way. One, they say better things about this guy than our news does. He also talks about the other victims, the foreign minister, Hussein Amir Abdullahian, sounds Armenian, the governor of East Azerbaijan province, the supreme leader's representative in Tabriz, and others. Okay. So, but here is the thing, there were conflicting stories. So, Russia Today, the Russian stuff doesn't like jump down the rabbit hole of conspiracy. And I think for the most part, they like the control of the information, just in the same, they'll never say ISIS is the US. They'll never say Edward Snowden's fake. Like they just don't say that stuff. I don't even think they say 9/11's an inside job. I'm pretty sure they do say the moon landing is fake though. Because it was. Okay. So it says here's from the RT. The news that Raisi's helicopter had initially gone off radar before making a crash landing was reported by Iranian news agencies at around 1300 Greenwich Mean Time the previous day. Conflicting reports then surfaced, many of which turned out to be false. Initially, it was reported that the president and all others on board had survived and were en route to Tabriz in a motorcade. This was later contradicted. There was a later false claim that contact had been made with some passengers and that rescue teams were headed to the crash site. Now, there were two other helicopters in that entourage, and they did reach their destination. I don't know if the motorcade could have been related to that. This says, conducting the operation to reach the site was extremely challenging due to adverse weather conditions and the difficult terrain of the Iran's East Azerbaijan province. There were reportedly 3 helicopters in the presidential convoy. The other 2 reached their destination safely. Okay, so it says the rescue operation continued throughout the night, but the incoming information remained highly contradictory. Late in the evening, Iran's deputy foreign minister announced that Imam Mohammed Ali al-Hashem, who was with Raisi, had allegedly made contact twice, complaining that he was feeling unwell. A representative of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps also stated that the helicopter had been located, but this information was later refuted by the head of Iran's Red Crescent Society. Similar confusion was observed in the Iranian media. Okay, so there's a lot. The only way we're getting information is from this government entity anyway, right? I think the Red Crescent's the government entity. Okay, it says early in the morning on May 20th, rescuers discovered the crash site of the helicopter, which had been completely incinerated, leaving nothing but ashes. Remember that. The head of the Ministry of Health and Medical Education of the Islamic Republic stated that DNA testing would be necessary for identifying some of the victims. Oh, dang it, I don't have the picture with me. So, all right, but there are pictures in the Wall Street Journal and online of the helicopter. I tweeted it, so go to @Monica Perez Show. I don't have any AV at hand. I'm not quick with the video, and I don't like to do too much video because this is really a podcast. So, but if you go look at those pictures, which I will be in some of the articles in my show notes, they show that you can see part of the helicopter. It looks like the whole tail. The couple of things that I thought were really weird about the pictures, you see like people searching in the fog all along the side of the mountain. So this says it was incinerated, but it wasn't from the pictures. And there's this picture that's very professional looking photo of 6 men carrying a stretcher with a body bag on it. It didn't look like a full giant person, but it was the charred remains of somebody on this plane. And I'm thinking, like, why do you have 6 guys carrying that thing down the mountain? If it was a difficult search early in the morning, I guess all the media was there already. I don't know. It looked weird to me. And another thing that looked weird is when you see the women mourning. I think it's supposedly at the funeral. It just was a very staged looking picture. They're all holding these, like, identical pre-printed photos, like, little posters of this guy. They don't actually, those thing where they look like they're crying but don't have tears. Like, I just hate that stuff. So, I'm seeing weird things in these pictures, but I really don't think that this thing didn't happen. So that kind of puzzles me. I don't know if anybody has any ideas. I'm, happy to entertain these thoughts. Um Yeah, so because of the remote location of the crash site and heavy fog, search and rescue teams had to work through the night with drones and dogs to locate the helicopter. So, and then just so you have it, Russia Today says that he was a pragmatic and consistent leader. He focused on strengthening ties with neighboring and regional allies rather than the West, in stark contrast to Rouhani, his predecessor. He cemented relationships with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, joined BRICS, and began to phase in integration with the Eurasian Economic Union and expand relations with Russia. You know what I think? They're going to do a new Comic-Con, but here where the West and the East are like two separate economic blocks. I don't know if we have any hope of keeping Iran on our side. They're like Iran, Russia, China, and South or North Korea are like the four mortal enemies. So I don't know why we would care if he's getting closer to them, but we might. But there's just been a lot of assassinations around Iran lately. There was that Soleimani, but there was also the 11 people who were killed, diplomats who were killed in Damascus, including generals. I mean, it's weird. Uh, yeah, it's just weird. Okay, so this is going on, and then at the same time or the next day, there's a competing story in the Wall Street Journal, which doesn't, I don't know why this got the same kind of billing as that, which was a huge, huge deal. We shall see what the aftermath of it all is. There's this story that I think is just playing into the long-term plan. The story is that the ICC, a prosecutor, is seeking arrest of Israeli and Hamas leaders. So the ICC is an independent tribunal based in The Hague, and it's supposed to hold high-ranking individuals accountable for grave violations of humanitarian law when domestic legal systems do not kick in. Whereas if it's between one country and another, that's when you get the International Court of Justice. And so the chief prosecutor is asking for arrest warrants of Netanyahu, but also Hamas leaders and a few other people. There's a 3-judge panel that's going to evaluate this request, and it may take weeks, it may take months, and if so, they will issue an arrest warrant, and then the countries that abide by this, and there's over 100 countries that do, will have to hand these guys over if they step foot in their country. So it's a chafe for sure. I think they actually have one of these against Putin, but I don't know if he if he avoids some of these countries. I really don't know. But here's the upshot. So they're really offended that they were put in the same category as Hamas. And they keep saying, like, this is a terrorist organization. We're a democracy. And that, first of all, is completely arbitrary. You're not incapable of committing atrocities, humanitarian atrocities. Also, Israel controls this territory, makes laws that affect these people, and those people cannot vote. So there are millions of people who live under Israeli control who cannot vote. So I think the term democracy is disputed when it comes there. And in any case, that is not an excuse for humanitarian atrocities. And the Hamas people were similarly like, you shouldn't put us in the same category. They also continue to point out that I think 35,000 people have been killed in Gaza now, very few of whom could possibly be combatants. And this was to retaliate against to Hamas supposedly killing 1,200 people in Israel by getting hang gliders through an Iron Dome. I mean, Anyway, but what's weird is they continue, so that's atrocious enough, but they continue to pump up atrocity propaganda and promote, the media, which generally does not overblow things like this, has been really emphasizing, giving a lot of airtime to those protesters and everything. And it seems to me, one of the clue in this ICC accusation is it's all about humanitarian aid. It's all about getting food to these people. And Israel is saying, like, we're trying the best we can, which is like hard to believe since they, bomb the crap out of them. It's like, but we're trying to get them food and failing. But it seems to me this whole entire thing, every bit of it, is pushing towards having the Palestinians themselves beg for the US to take control of their territory or put in a government which is they're going to say is theirs, but it's really a puppet government. So some of the people who are involved in these arrest warrants might be people that the Palestinians would expect to be in their government. But if they are arrested, or if there's a warrant out, if they're fugitives, they will not be permitted to be a part of that government. So these warrants could be a way to just get those guys out of the picture. But mainly it's all just, in my opinion, a stepping stone towards the US coming to save the day. And do away with, what might be like an Israeli proxy control of Gaza. Okay. So, all right, on a totally unrelated note, Red Lobster, which is a huge seafood chain, is declaring Chapter 11. So they're going to keep plugging along. They're going to keep having restaurants open. They're going to close a lot of them. But what Chapter 11 is they cannot pay, they cannot service their debt. That's what it generally means. So if you are on the equity side, if you own it and have debt, your equity is generally wiped out. It's not a public company. It's owned by a Thai company, the Thai Union Group. And they're saying that COVID really took a huge chunk out of their business. It didn't rebound. Then inflation made the prices go up at the same time that their target group, which is families who make under $50,000 a year or people, aren't spending as much. They're really cutting back. And I have to say, my sisters worked at Red Lobster. It was like, to me, it was a fancy restaurant growing up. And my mother, like, it was definitely a treat. She would save the coupons and we would go to Red Lobster. It was only years later when I went back with her that I was like, gee, this isn't as good as I remember. I think I've had a lot better food since then, but I always, we always enjoyed it, whatever. But one thing they did that actually will probably pop up again in the future is on the way down, circling the drain, they made their all-you-can-eat shrimp permanent, and it cost them, I think, like $11 million that it would not otherwise have cost them. And I was like, yeah, all right. So they made a bad call. However, the supplier is the Thai Union Group of the shrimp. So it's possible that the Thai Union Group told the president, this is being investigated probably by the bondholders because it comes out of their, the value of the company will accrue basically entirely to the bondholders. There's probably no equity left, or you wouldn't be in Chapter 11. So when so if they saw this thing going under and they're like, well, we can pull out $11 million if you just buy $11 million worth of shrimp, that's, I think that would be classified as fraudulent conveyance, like making a deal knowing that the company is illiquid or insolvent because you want to take the money out before it gets to the creditor. So they might have trouble, like real trouble with that. Anyway, you will still see your Red Lobsters. So, all right. Let's hit some comments. I got a couple of more stories and our clip. So any comments today? All right. Hey, everybody. Hi. Oh, avian flu is kicking up. Interesting. Where was I reading that? I can't remember, but all right. I'll have to get on that. Hi, whipped cream. Okay. Red Crescent is a global Red Cross NGO arm. Oh, that's so interesting, Some Quack. Thank you. So if they are giving us information, I can consider that more suspicious, more suspect than I would even the Iranian government, because presuming that this is a hostile act against the Iranian government, the propaganda spin coming out of the West would be more likely to cover it up. Hey, Angus. Samantha is asking, what was the story with the Turkish drone that discovered the remains and then drew a star and crescent, resembling the Turkish flag as a peculiar detail to cap off the narrative? I had not heard that. I hadn't stumbled upon that little detail. Do you really think, Kelvin, that this is fake? He's saying it's just another mannequin, but someone booked a dwarf size by mistake for the stretcher photo op. I mean, do we think there's any chance this didn't happen? Because there's those pictures are screwy for sure. Oh, Samantha says my Mima would be so sad about what's happening with Red Lobster. I know they're closing a lot of stores, but not all of them. We should all go to a Red Lobster store to celebrate our moms and grandmas. Kevin says, my mom used to give us lobster for dinner in the 70s because it was cheap in Boston. It was cheap. It gets stuck in your teeth, though. No, we never got the lobster. My mother would just get like sole amandine. Sole amandine. I love that stuff. And then the biscuits. So she would take the biscuits home. So she would like save the bread and then you'd eat it later. She was a crack up, that chick. Okay. So let me get to my other. Oh, JC, thank you. JC says, I just heard the podcast where you said you had your first Mother's Day without your mom. I hope you've been doing well. I have. It's so weird. Like, I'm very good at just, not thinking about stuff, not, indulging my emotions. But like, I've noticed that like I'm a little easier to cry. You get that? Like, I go to church and I'll just like something will move me to tears. And that usually when I know it will pass, this has happened before. You have like a sad stretch, but it's just interesting. I like to share it sometimes because we go through these things and you expect to like, get back out there. And this is the one thing I think, like if you're ever, I think I might have mentioned this recently. If you're in line or somebody's, rude to you and you could take a minor offense, like you really don't know what that person's going through in that moment because we are expected to just get back on our feet. So I always think it's a good reminder that, you know what, let's take it easy on each other every once in a while. The ICC Netanyahu press release is fake too. Check the video. Creepy little stooges. Really interesting. I mean, I know there's something up with the ICC thing. That's obviously, weird. But I just think it's all, maybe people have other expectations. But for me, it's just all the expectation of, as soon as Blinken right in the beginning said he wanted a two-state solution, I was like, oh, well, that's what we're going to get then. What could the angle be? And the angle is it's our state. It's ours. Okay. Oh, so my friend Carol, thank you so much. Hat tip to you. Always shoots me these stories about Boeing, about the Boeing planes and bad things, bad stuff about Boeing, but also Delta and other airlines on her radar. I think she sent me. I think there have been 4 or 5 of these in May. So I figure it's time. They're accumulating. I might as well rattle them off. Okay. So there's one, and I put all the stuff in the show notes at monicaperezshow.com. There's one, the Boeing 747 carrying 345 people bounces on the LAX runway during a hard landing. I think it was a Lufthansa flight. And it's really funny because I don't know what it is. Like my mother used to watch the races, like the constant, like there's a channel of just races, TPG, maybe just horse races, just all day, like the most obscure things. She's like, this one's crap, that one's crap. But then, she'd watch it. Looks like this guy just sits there with a camera. It looks very professional, just taking pictures of all the landings. So when this thing bounces on the runway and then takes off again. A huge 4-engine plane from, I guess it was coming in from Germany. I don't know. He's just, it just sounds like he is commentating on a like a baseball game. It's like, would you look at that? Whoa, that plane really took a bounce. Wow, I've never seen that. Just he's giddy at how he's like, this is the, he didn't actually say coolest, coolest landing he's ever seen, but he was just like, this is the most, dramatic, rough landing we've ever filmed. So that is kind of funny and doesn't look like anybody got hurt. So that's not bad. This is another one that was cuckoo. There was a flight to Washington from Mexico, Dallas Delta Airlines flight 604, landed, was at the gate, and you can see the pictures under the cockpit. It just burst into flames. And then as you watch the film proceed, you see all the fire engines and everything, and the people shooting down the slides. And that would have been super, super scary, although they are good at keeping this stuff under control. It was an A321, so it was an Airbus. That's a very popular plane. That's that mid-size plane. Anyway, so it wasn't Boeing, but it was Delta. All right, another one. Private jet belonging to Donald Trump ended up colliding with another plane while taxiing at the West Palm Beach International Airport in Florida. The other plane didn't have anybody in it, and I don't think Donald Trump was in this one. It was Sunday, and yeah, just bumped into it. Weird. Okay. Okay, here's another one. Flames were spotted at the back of a 747-400 aircraft as it took off in Makassar, Indonesia, with 468 passengers on board. Wow. And then I believe it landed again and did not go anywhere, but that was crazy looking. That looked cookie. Here today was another one. This is something I've talked about before. The headline is "One Dead, Several Injured as Severe Turbulence Strikes Boeing." The passengers were thrown to the ceiling when the Singapore-bound jetliner plunged 6,000 feet in minutes. Okay, I talked about this before. Always keep your seatbelt fastened on a plane because if it drops, your head will go through the ceiling. People do. Carol's like, I never heard of that in my life. I'm like, I have heard of that. I have heard of that. And I don't know if the pilots can do anything, but I was told about it by a pilot, an American pilot, and he said that the American pilots are much better at navigating this stuff, that America has the best pilots in the world. And anyway, it would show up in how amazing our history has been in the past 15 years or so in the FAA. But of course, they're going to change all that. Oh, well. Oh, which reminds me, there are all these cloud seeding stories. So I think that all of the airtime that these air incidents are getting, even real ones, it's possible that these real incidents happened all the time and we just didn't hear about them. It's the US commercial jet fatalities that were 0 for the longest time, with a couple of exceptions, which I think were like false flags or something, that they want to change air travel. They want to change the infrastructure. They want to move them to electric. They want to cut down on air travel. They want us to stop communicating humanly, physically with other people. So all of that is going into this. And at the same time, we're hearing several different lines of stories about weather modification, cloud seeding. I have to take credit for one of I figured the Boeing thing in the airplane for a long time. I've been talking about that. The fact that cloud seeding has entered the mainstream discussion is also something that I identified 2 years ago. I think it was May 4th, 2022. Dean, a tweet of mine, and I were communicating. He sent me a picture of, it was on a Sacramento, California TV news station. It was so ridiculous because of this. So they're like, look at all this rain. And then they said, oh, we're going to cut to our like roving journalist, Biffy, whatever her name is, and see what she has to say. And she's like, oh my gosh, I was here with my cameraman at this local airport. And I literally happened to notice that one of the planes had sprayers on it. So we just went over and asked the guy, like, what's that all about? And he said, oh, we see the clouds. And she said, so go figure. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? Yeah, it was like, that's a huge story. I've been talking about this forever, and they just act like it's no big deal. So then I looked it up, and SMUD, the Sacramento Municipal Utility Department, was openly admitting at that point they were cloud seeding in order to increase hydroelectric power. And I don't know why they have the authority to seed the planes, but at that point, when Dean said that to me, I was like, oh, okay, obviously they're getting ready to talk about this openly. It was what I will call a watershed moment. And so now they are talking about that absolutely openly. If you Google it right now, cloud seeding, you'll see it's not a conspiranoid fantasy. And what really annoys me, it reminds me of the Chris Cuomo story from last week, is if you say, I've been telling you about chemtrails for the longest time, because that's what that is, like, they do a lot of things, but it's salt, it's, iodide, sodium iodide, whatever. It's stuff that they're spraying up there, and you can see it, and that's what also there's the pollutants in the fuel that create the clouds as well. We talked about that with Jim Lee, but I'm just saying, you'll say this stuff. They'll come out and admit it now, but you're still crazy for saying it before it was allowed to be said. And Chris Cuomo said that exactly about Joe Rogan, which is kind of a funny stage play, I guess. That Joe Rogan was defending ivermectin, which was right, and the people who were criticizing it were wrong. But Joe was also criticizing the vaccines, which was wrong, even though he turned out to be right, because at the time he had no reason to think there was anything wrong with the vaccines. Whereas now we know that there's some things wrong with it. It's mind blowing. But the idea is it was wrong to question the official narrative when it came to something taboo. And in this case as well. So even if you end up being right, you were still wrong, crazy and bad. So now they did the cloud seeding that started 2 years ago. They're also talking about, there was one other thing. They were first, let me just see what okay. Now they're talking, oh, right, okay. Now they're talking about how the planes, the contrails, the chemtrails, the pollution coming out of the back of jets, which Jim Lee explained to us, there were massive changes in what's in the fuel. Now that stuff are the seeds for clouds. Like 75% of the seeds for clouds are chemicals, which wasn't true before all the chemicals were released. So I personally think they changed that on purpose for whatever reason to increase the cloud cover. I don't know. But now that's being openly discussed. Again, I'll put it in the show notes. I think technologyreview.com was a place where I saw this latest. It says, now we need to reroute planes so that we can cut down on these trails. Now, Jim Lee told us when they do that, they can make the planes go higher. Then you don't get the trails, but the pollution's much worse. That's when you get those milky skies. So they will probably, I assume, say we need fewer flights, we need electric planes. They're going to use it to their advantage at this point for sure. But there's another, a third leg of this stool coming down. I saw an article just from March 2024. So you can see all this stuff is coming down at once. Clark University. What if every dark cloud had a silver iodide lining? Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar shines light on cloud seeding in an era of climate change. So here she's doing that thing, which really drives me crazy. She says, as climate change alters patterns of precipitation, like that's just super annoying. It's not about that. It's this stuff. It's cloud seeding that alters patterns of precipitation. Governments and utility companies around the world are turning to the little studied practice of cloud seeding. Little studied, they're doing it. It's effective. You don't even need to study it. They're doing it. It's done. It's technology in use to generate snow and rain, according to this chick. This is a quote. as I dug into this, I was surprised both by how common cloud seeding actually is, especially where I live in Colorado, and all across the American West, said Emily Yeh, professor of geography at the University of Colorado Boulder in her March 19th life. She's a professor of geography in Boulder. And she's shocked to learn that cloud seeding has been happening right over her head for who knows how long. You can see it. You can see it. She didn't notice that? Her speech was called Global Geographies of Weather Modification in an Era of Climate Change. It's just the inversion here is just infuriating. But here's the punchline, and then we'll get to our clip. She pointed out that cloud seeding raises the possibility of broader acceptance of another, more controversial weather modification technique, stratospheric aerosol injection, SAI. So that's what chemtrails proper that aren't just spewing out of the back of planes is. Although, depending on what you put in the fuel, it could be. So she's saying we want to talk about this, implying, and she probably states openly, it's not happening yet. But it's definitely happening. Just like cloud seeding was happening when people told me that I was batshit. And that the stuff coming out of planes was creating clouds, like all the stuff. So if I say this is happening already, SAI, I'm wrong and bad. But if it's later revealed that it is already happening, I will still be wrong and bad. So whatever. Okay. That one makes me mad. Well, I even have more stories, if you can believe it. I'll give it to you. It's a one-liner. Did you ever see this company, Nikola? It's a company named Nikola. It makes like electric trucks versus Tesla, which makes electric cars. This guy, Trevor Milton, who was the CEO or founder or whatever, tweeted a picture of a truck that looked like it was being self-driven, but it wasn't. It was just rolling down a hill. I believe that was the main thing he was convicted of, defrauding investors with that. Sentenced to 4 years in December. We had the same lawyers as Elon Musk had for tweeting that he had funding for buying Twitter that he did not have. I think that was what it was for, which affected the stock price and generated losses of, I think, tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. He gets off scot-free, still runs the company, gets to tweet, buys Twitter, yada, yada. It's just, I don't even know if this Nikola guy is legit. I doubt it. And I'll believe it when I see it that he spends 4 years in jail. But I just feel like justice isn't really about justice, let's just say. Anywho. All right. Let's hit this outro. Okay, so I was watching. Now that I'm doing 2 solo shows a week, I'm not doing as many interviews, but that's okay because there are plenty of great interviews out there, more podcasts probably than any of us could ever really get through. And I was listening to one, just stumbled upon it, from Delingpole of Sasha Latvanova. Is that her name? I'll have to go and look. I'm going to make you guys wait with me for a second. Because, whatever. That's bad. All right, I will find it. I'm going to find it, even though you guys have to wait. Sorry, guys. Okay, this is Sasha Latapova. Sasha Latapova she was an executive in pharma. She knows a lot about a lot of stuff. It's a really good listen. So I'm putting in the show notes the actual video from Rumble. You can watch the whole thing. It's like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. And there were several clips I wanted to take out, but this one that she's talking about, I personally have witnessed myself, and I bet there's not a person listening to me now who hasn't witnessed that this was really what was going on in hospitals during COVID, and that the deaths were primarily not from COVID, if completely not from COVID, but from how people were being treated. And lifting liability, she doesn't talk about this, but lifting liability, the threat of liability is, to me, a tremendous moral hazard, completely illegitimate in every way. It's really horrible. But anyway, so this is her story, her experience, and but I highly recommend listening to the whole thing. And that is where I shall leave it. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. This is Monica Perez.
Basically, what I think is a mistake is to assign the same cause to COVID illness and COVID death. Just because media tells you it's both COVID doesn't mean they have the same cause. So the COVID illness was real at least in some percentage of people who were designated COVID cases. So a lot of them was recategorized flu and normal seasonal flu and cold, but some of them were real. There were real novel symptoms. So you have to look at the disease and diagnostics by symptoms, not by PCR. So just by symptoms, we know that there were a substantial number of people, including myself, experienced really, really bizarre symptomology. And I'm over 50 years old, and I've had a lot of flu and common cold in my life. That's not it. Okay, so we know there's some difference there. And then COVID death is a different causation entirely. COVID death was largely capture, kidnap in the hospitals, false diagnosed with PCR, and then murder protocols. And I've written about this, also experienced this with my family. They nearly tried to kill my mother-in-law with this protocol in the hospital. But I know in the UK they did midazolam, ventilators, starvation, dehydration. This is just capture and murder in the hospital.
So what you're saying is that people during the panic, they went to hospital for a test thinking, oh, I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. The hospital said, it looks like you've got a bad case of COVID. You better stay here. And then the National Health Service in the UK or other institutions elsewhere essentially murdered these people using midazolam, the death pathway drug, or put them on ventilators, which destroys the lungs. Is the last thing you... Is that generally how it worked?
Yeah, so the protocol is, that we experienced it actually not in 2020, in 2023, at the end of 2023. So they're still doing this in the US. I don't know about the UK. But upstate New York, so I'm going to talk about my own experience with it. Upstate New York Hospital, Rochester, New York, Highland Hospital System. My elderly mother-in-law went in with what looked like bad flu or pneumonia. So she had trouble breathing. She had mucus in her lungs. Tested negative for COVID. They still stuck her into the COVID ward. So once you're in the COVID ward, that's really scary. So normal, and in the US, these COVID wards were federally funded, staffed by different staff. So once they push you in there, so the protocol is they try to dehydrate her, whichever way. They said, we don't have juice. We ran out of it. We don't give her IV fluids. We were asking, why are you not giving IV fluids? They send a representative to talk to the family, to gaslight the family, who says, in this hospital, we only treat COVID. We don't treat your other conditions. We're like, she has blood pressure, elderly person, she has blood pressure problems. She has, she needs to have, we don't give her blood pressure medication because we only treat COVID. And can you imagine? So then they try to dehydrate the person because that's a way to get them sicker, especially elderly. And then they push remdesivir. So we knew about this. We put in the chart no remdesivir, but they still were coming in and trying to sneak her remdesivir. Remdesivir shuts down kidneys and causes fluid buildup in the lung, and then they call it COVID, and then they put them on ventilator. That's how So once they started doing that, we figured out a way to get her out of there because I was freaking out and I was hiring lawyers and But many people were not that lucky, and I know several people. Well, I know a lot of people through my work, but some horrific cases, especially they were doing it to disabled people and children with Down syndrome and other disabilities who couldn't advocate for themselves. And they would, So I know one, Rebecca Charles, also publishes on Substack. Her 28-year-old daughter with disability was murdered like this. And she was murdered with narcotics, with fentanyl. They gave her fentanyl IV. The fentanyl patch was enough to kill a horse. So that's how they were doing it. And so that's your COVID death, which is, I'm saying, causality of COVID death is murder. Causality of COVID case, most of it is recategorized flu. Some of it were synthetic toxins. That's my position.